Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to be talking about the eastern box turtle. And we've got a whole bunch of research here, articles, all sorts of things. And I have to say, some of the things that I've learned about the eastern box turtle have just been so fascinating. So right off the bat, I mean, the name box turtle comes from their shell. And their shell is not just, protection, but it's really kind of the key to their longevity.
Yeah.
These turtles can live to be over 100 years old in some cases.
Oh, yeah. It's really incredible. The shell, especially the plastron, which is that bottom part of the shell, is hinged, and it allows them to completely close themselves up. So they're basically, safe and sound inside this little box, and it keeps them safe from predators.
Oh,
It
yeah.
really does create a level of safety that very few animals have.
Yeah, it's like a little portable fortress, right? But it's not just the shell, it sounds like, that makes them live so long. The sources that we have here are saying that they have a really slow metabolism, and they also prefer to live in environments that are stable and don't change a whole lot. It almost seems like their whole existence is about taking things slow and
Yeah.
steady.
Yeah, that's a great observation. And I think, when you connect those dots, a slow metabolism means that they don't burn through energy very quickly,
Hmm.
which is helpful when food or other resources are scarce. And their preference for stable environments means that they're less likely to be faced with sudden changes, like, a catastrophic change to their environment that could wipe out a population. So it's really a combination of biological and ecological factors that contribute to these incredibly long lifespans.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if they perceive time differently than we do, right?
Okay, so we know that they're called box turtles because of that unique shell, and we know that they can live for a really long time.
Uh-huh.
But where exactly would we find these long-lived, slow-moving creatures? So they're found in a pretty big part of the eastern United States. You can find them all the way from Maine down to Florida, and then west as far as like Kansas and Texas.
Okay, so it's not just the southeast like I was initially thinking. That's interesting. And they prefer to be on land rather than in water, right? I think that's what terrestrial means.
Yeah, that's right. So they're not aquatic turtles. They're not swimming around in lakes and rivers. They
Right.
really do prefer moist environments, but on land. So think forests, meadows, even grassy fields. But there has to be water nearby. So access to water is very important for drinking and bathing.
That makes sense. Why is moisture so important, though, for a turtle that lives on land?
Well, it has to do with how they regulate their temperature. Eastern box turtles are ectotherms, which basically means that they rely on external sources of heat to warm themselves up. And they can overheat pretty easily, so they need these moist environments to stay cool. It's kind of their way of avoiding that hot midday sun.
Yeah, I got you. So they're slow moving, they need a lot of moisture, and they have these incredibly long lifespans. What are they fueling all that with? What do they eat?
Well, they have a pretty diverse diet. They're omnivores, which means that they eat both plants and animals.
Yeah, so what kinds of things would be on the menu for a typical eastern box turtle?
Well, they're not picky eaters. Grasses, mushrooms, berries, insects, even snails.
Snails, really? Wow, that's really interesting. I would never have guessed that. With a diet that diverse, do they play any specific role in their ecosystem?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So one of the really interesting things about them is that they act as seed dispersers. So you know how fruit-eating birds eat fruit and then they fly somewhere else and they poop out the seeds? Well, box turtles are doing something similar. They're eating fruits and berries, and then as they move around, they're dispersing those seeds and helping plants to spread. They also eat a lot of insects, which helps to control insect populations.
So they're like little gardeners, helping the forest to thrive. That's pretty amazing. But the research that we have here says that they're solitary creatures. Does that mean they spend their entire lives alone?
They do spend a lot of time by themselves, yeah. It's a little different from some mammals. They're not pack animals like wolves, or they're not constantly interacting like some grazing animals. Most of the time, you're going to find them out on their own, foraging for food or basking in the sun.
But they gotta interact at least sometimes, right? I mean, at least for mating.
You got it, yeah. There are some exceptions, especially during mating season, which is usually in the warmer months. But for the most part, they're loners.
That's so interesting. So they're active during the day, right? Looking for all this food. What about the rest of their day? When are they most active? And how does that tie into their need for moisture?
Well, they are what we call diurnal, which means that they're active during the day. But if you remember, they're not big fans of the midday heat. So they've kind of adapted their activity patterns to avoid the hottest hours. So you're most likely to find them out and about early in the morning or later in the afternoon, when the temperatures are a bit cooler and the humidity is higher.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. So it all kind of ties together. They need moisture, which influences where they live.
Hmm.
And that also influences what time of day they're active and even what they eat to a certain extent.
Exactly. It's a very successful strategy. I mean, they've been around for millions of years. But unfortunately, they are facing some very real threats, many of which are due to human activity.
Yeah, let's talk about those threats in just a little bit. Before we took that little break, we were talking about how the eastern box turtles, their whole approach to life, being slow and steady, it's helped them to survive for millions of years. But now, as their habitats are shrinking, roads are cutting through their territories, all those things that made them successful are starting to become liabilities, which is kind of sad.
Yeah, it really is. It makes you realize that even the most resilient creatures, they're still vulnerable when their environment changes too quickly.
So let's talk about some of those threats. We touched on habitat loss, road mortality, and then the illegal pet trade. But what really surprised me is just how interconnected all those threats are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not just one single thing that's impacting them. It's really this perfect storm of factors.
Mm.
So you've got habitat loss, which is driven by things like urbanization, development. And what that does is it fragments their territories, makes it harder for them to find food, find mates, find suitable places to nest.
And when those territories are fragmented, they have to cross roads more often, which puts them at a higher risk of getting hit by cars, right?
Exactly. And it's not just roads either. It's things like agricultural fields, lawns that have been treated with pesticides. Even our own backyards can become death traps if we're not careful.
It's a good reminder that even our actions, even if we think they're harmless, they can have unintended consequences. But it's not all doom and gloom, though, right? The sources that we have here mention some really inspiring conservation efforts that are happening. What are some of the things that give you hope for the future of the eastern box turtle?
Well, there's a lot of great work being done. And it's really encouraging to see so many people coming together to protect these turtles. I think one of the most exciting things that's happening right now is the use of technology to track their movements.
Wait, are we talking about like GPS trackers on turtles? How does that even work?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So researchers are using radio telemetry, which means that they attach these tiny little transmitters to the turtle's shells. And this allows them to follow the turtles around and gather all sorts of data, like their home ranges, how they migrate, how they interact with roads, all sorts of things.
So it's like having this little secret window into their lives. What kind of insights are they getting from this data?
Oh, it's a treasure trove of information. I mean, for example, we're learning how important it is to connect those fragmented habitats that we were just talking about. So by understanding where the turtles go, how they move between different areas, we can create wildlife corridors or safe passageways that allow them to move without encountering so many dangers.
That's so cool. So it's not just about protecting isolated patches of habitat. It's about creating this whole network of spaces that are all connected and allow them to move freely. What other solutions are people coming up with?
Well, another thing that people are doing is focusing on those road crossings. So some communities are installing these under-road tunnels or culverts that are specifically designed to allow turtles to cross safely under busy roads.
Oh, yeah, I've seen those. It's like giving them their own little turtle highway.
Exactly. And they're actually really effective at reducing road mortality. And then there's citizen science. So organizations are starting to realize that everyday people can play a big role in conservation. They're enlisting volunteers to collect data on things like turtle sightings, road crossings, nesting locations.
So anybody can be a turtle detective.
That's right. And that's really valuable because it means we can collect more data, which helps us to understand population trends, identify critical habitat areas, and even track how effective different conservation strategies are.
It's like crowdsourcing conservation. That's awesome. Okay, so we talked about habitat restoration earlier, but I'm wondering, what does that actually look like in practice? What are people actually doing?
So habitat restoration is really this multifaceted approach. Sometimes it involves removing invasive plant species, those species that can choke out the native vegetation, and that helps to create a more suitable environment for turtles and other wildlife. Other times it involves planting native trees and shrubs that can provide food and shelter for turtles.
So it's really about creating this habitat that meets all of their needs, like designing a little turtle paradise.
Exactly. And it's not just about plants either. It's also about protecting wetlands and riparian areas, which are crucial for their access to water. And remember those moist environments that they love so much.
Right, right. So it's about creating this whole mosaic of habitats that are all interconnected and provide everything they need. But all of that takes a lot of work and resources, right? How can people help? How can they support all these conservation initiatives?
Well, there are a lot of ways to get involved. You can donate to organizations that are working on the ground, volunteer your time, or just spread the word about the importance of turtle conservation. Even small actions can make a big difference.
I think what's really inspiring about all this is that it shows that people do care. It's not just scientists and conservationists, it's entire communities that are coming together to try to make a difference.
Yeah, it really is a beautiful thing to see. And it highlights the fact that we're not separate from nature. We're part of it. Our actions have ripple effects, and we have a responsibility to make sure that those ripples are positive ones.
Speaking of connections, let's talk a little bit about eastern box turtle anatomy and adaptations. What are some of the things that make these turtles so uniquely suited to their environment?
Well, the most obvious adaptation is, of course, that incredible shell. I mean, it's not just a fashion statement, it's a masterpiece of evolution. It's made up of these bony plates that are called scutes, and they're covered by a layer of keratin, which is the same material that makes up our fingernails.
So it's like built-in armor plating. That explains why they can withstand so much. I'm also curious about the patterns on their shells. Are those just for looks, or do they serve a purpose?
So those patterns are all about camouflage. It helps them to blend in with their surroundings, makes them less visible to predators.
It's like their own personal invisibility cloak.
Exactly. And it makes sense when you think about their preference for those shady, moist environments. It's all about staying cool, hidden, and safe.
Right, right. What about their legs?
Oh, their legs are another great example of adaptation. They're really sturdy and strong. Allows them to move through dense vegetation, climb over obstacles, and even dig those nests that we talked about earlier.
So they're like little off-road vehicles built for exploring the forest.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
They're not exactly known for their speed, though, are they?
Well, true. They're not going to win any races.
Hmm.
But that slow and steady approach has worked for them for millions of years. It's all about conserving energy and making the most of their resources.
I'm sensing a theme here. Slow and steady wins the race, right? What about their senses? How do they experience the world around them?
Well, they have really sharp eyesight, especially for detecting movement. And they can actually see a wider range of colors than we can, which might help them to find food or identify potential mates.
So they're seeing the world in ways that we can only imagine. What about their hearing? Can they hear us talking about them right now?
Well, their hearing isn't as acute as their vision, but they could detect low-frequency vibrations, which may help them to sense approaching predators, or even to locate prey that's underground.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like they have this built-in radar system. What about their sense of smell? I would imagine that's pretty important for finding food.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They have a very keen sense of smell. And they use it to locate things like ripe fruits, tasty mushrooms, and even those earthworms that they love so much.
So they're basically these walking, talking sensory machines, perfectly adapted to their environment. It's amazing how evolution has shaped them over millions of years.
Yeah, it really is a testament to the power of natural selection. And the more we learn about these turtles, the more we realize how much they have to teach us about resilience, about adaptation, about the interconnectedness of life.
Absolutely. They're like these living, breathing ambassadors for the natural world, reminding us how important conservation is and how important it is to maintain that delicate balance. But let's shift gears for a second and dive into the fascinating world of eastern box turtle social lives. Are they really as solitary as we think they are?
Well, that's a great question. And while they do spend a lot of time on their own, it doesn't mean that they don't have their own unique ways of communicating and interacting.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What kind of social cues do they use? Do they have like secret turtle handshakes or something?
Well, not quite handshakes, but they do use a combination of visual signals, scents, and even vocalizations to communicate. So, for example, the males, they'll often engage in these head-bobbing displays to establish dominance or attract females during mating season.
So it's like their version of a dance-off.
Yeah, something like that.
You mentioned scents. Are they leaving little perfume trails for each other?
Well, I wouldn't say perfume, but they do have these scent glands that release pheromones, which are chemical signals that can convey information about their sex, their age, even their individual identity.
So it's like their own personal signature scent. And you said they use vocalizations too. Are we talking like full-blown turtle conversations?
Not quite conversations,
Okay.
but they can make a variety of sounds, like hisses, grunts, and even clicks. And these sounds